If you've not, please do so, because it must be on record. I'm Bob Tanner. The other board members are Scott Calhoun and John DePlacido. I'd introduce the following members. Matthew Puz, Zoning and Development Officer. Julie Maggio, Assistant Zoning and Development Officer. Denise Pizarro, Zoning and Development Secretary. Cecilia Mahana, Court Reporter. And Jeremy Toman, Board Solicitor. After the presentation by the appellant, the board will hear from those in question of the appeal, those in favor and opposed. Any documents or evidence that is presented must be kept for a period of 60 days for our records, and after all presentations are made, the board will recess. We will then reconvene and make our decisions. The board has up to 45 days to render a decision, but they're typically made this evening. If you do not care to wait for the decision, you may call the zoning office in the morning after 8:30 a.m. I'd now ask that everyone please stand to be sworn in. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Please answer, I do.
I do.
Thank you. Okay, we just have one appeal on for tonight, 22-18, Savarino Companies.
Hi, for you.
Good evening, I'm Mike Sanford from Sanford Surveying, and I'm here with Rob Savarino from Easy Applicant. So we're here tonight to present information regarding to a parking variance for the project. So I'm just going to start this off, kind of give you some information, and then turn it over to Rob, and he'll provide some more information. But we're here tonight specifically related to a parking variance, section 145-92C, minimum required parking. Our updated variance application sketch, which I provided, hopefully you have a smaller copy, and we do have a larger copy here as well. It shows the project, the buildings, the driveways, the parking. And shown on this exhibit, the project's on the east side of Edinburgh Road at the end of a very long driveway. And I just stress that because it'll come into play with some other of my points. It's a very long driveway. We do understand that ultimately a land development plan approval is required for the project. But this parking variance, this zoning hearing board variance is required before we can present that land development to the planning commission and supervisors. So as you know, your board is authorized to vary from strict application of the requirements if the strict application would deprive the owner of reasonable use of the land. So for purposes of this meeting, I would just go through, if you don't mind, the 5 criteria and show you how we comply with those just for the record. So the first criteria is that the property has unique physical conditions. So this subject property is not uniformly shaped. Rather, it's uniquely shaped. It's traversed by a multitude of water courses, wetlands, and in addition, the property is steeply sloped, and its elevation from south to north falls 90 feet from the south property line to Edinburgh Road. So these factors create a unique physical condition that affects this property. Another unique characteristic of this that the applicant is asking for is in part age-restricted apartments, for which the township zoning ordinance does not list that on its list of minimum required parking. Age-restricted parking is not listed on that list. So the second variance criteria is that because of these physical conditions, there's no possibility the property can be developed in strict conformity with the ordinance for reasonable use of property. So the steep grade of the property, 90 feet of fall, requires considerable cut and fill to prepare the pad sites for the buildings, parking, stormwater system. The applicant had to seek and receive permitting for impacts to the water courses and wetlands. This site is quite challenging. In addition to the physical limitations I mentioned, the zoning ordinance, as I mentioned, does not provide a parking requirement for specific to age-restricted units. It's unfortunate because the zoning ordinance was just updated this year, and in my personal opinion, it seems like it was something they maybe wish they would have considered. But it's not in there. The reason I say it's in my mind is the goal of the parking requirement, the zoning ordinance, is to provide adequate off-street parking. I think that is the goal. That makes sense. Certainly no one wants a scenario that visitors or guests could park on adjoining properties or park on the street causing inconvenience. But as I explained when I started, this appeal is different than maybe most because of that really long driveway. Because of that long driveway, there is, my opinion, zero chance anyone's going to park on Edinburgh Road and choose to walk up that driveway. It's just not going to happen. So I think that makes this application a little it's just too far. But on the flip side of required minimum parking, per the zoning ordinance, section 145-93, the zoning ordinance has a maximum required parking. So if you have a maximum required parking, clearly there's a sensitivity to that. So probably because of additional land clearing, resource impacts, more impervious area, more runoff. So they don't want you to build too much parking. So the goal would be to find that sweet spot. Just the right amount of parking, off-street parking to serve the development's use. So because of the property's limitations I talked about, because of the absence of minimum parking requirement for age restricted, we feel the property cannot be developed in strict conformity with the ordinance, and we're here tonight asking for a variance. The next criteria is that the unnecessary hardship was not created by the applicant. So the park property, steep slope, water courses, wetlands, he didn't create those. That's the parcel of land he's working on, so that hardship was not created by him. He didn't create your zoning ordinance, so the lack thereof of parking requirements was not created by him. The fourth criteria is that if the variance is authorized, it would not alter the character of the district or impair use of adjacent properties or public welfare. This property is zoned R3, high density residential, and the property's use, apartments, is consistent with that use. Because of that, it's consistent with the ordinance. It would not alter the character of the neighborhood. Also, as I mentioned, this long driveway, it would not impact, if a parking variance was granted, it would not impact the adjoining properties because the parking is going to be on this property, not other properties. The final criteria is that if the variance is offered, it's the minimum to afford relief and the least modification possible. So Rob will talk this in more detail, but the requested parking variance is in line with other age-restricted properties that he's developed. He did engage a traffic consultant, which he'll talk about, to assess the needs of this development, how much parking was needed, because again, we're looking for that sweet spot. So the requested variance of 1 space per age-restricted unit is supported by his needs study, and we look forward to your approval, and I'll allow Rob to talk more about the project, his study, and then we're here to answer any questions.
Thanks, Mike. Rob Savarino, Savarino Companies. Do you need my address?
Yes.
500 Seneca Street, Suite 508, Buffalo, New York, 14204. As Mike mentioned, we do a fair amount of senior housing of all types. This is independent living senior, and with each and every project we develop, we also manage and own the projects. So it's in the best interest for us to not just realize we're a developer here, but we're also an owner and an operator. I do have an example of a project, and if I might add, I can put the large diagram up on the board, but I did make copies for the board to see. Can I still be recorded if I approach? Okay, great. So what I want to submit to the board is, here is the traffic or the parking study prepared by SRF Associates out of Rochester. They're a transportation planning, engineering, and design firm. They cite the methodology they use to calculate the parking, and the end result was, even though the code reads a certain way, they thought the appropriate amount of parking for the 128-unit senior project was on a 1-to-1 basis, and the appropriate parking for the non-age restricted product was a 2-to-1 basis, which complies with the code. Mike and I can explain that we're actually here to show more than that amount of parking, but we're asking for this. We can show how we calculated actually some surplus parking. So what I'll give to each board member is that study again. And then also I took a project developed in Amherst, New York, a senior housing project of 101 units, similar in style and amenity driven as the project we're proposing here. This really forms the basis of our request because we're really here to talk about the senior portion, because the non-age restricted portion is on a 2-to-1 basis. Here I'll show you a 4-story apartment, same style, same configuration. I'll put it up on the board for everyone to see, but I'll distribute this. We had 101 units, 38 1-bedroom units, 63 2-bedroom units, and we were granted the 1-to-1 basis, or slightly over. We're at 103 car parks. We continue to manage. I own this property, manage it, and I'll show you a diagram of an aerial of how that looks now. And when you really look, even at the height of driving time, the parking lot is approximately 40 to 50% occupied. I'll show you this. So again, parking demand study, and then the Amherst, New York.
Thank you.
Development that is similar to what we're proposing here. So really, it's just, it's minimal use in parking. Many of our residents don't have cars. We do want to plan on a 1-to-1 basis, and the 1-to-1, even in the traffic study, or the parking study, takes into account visitors. As typical to a project like this, we offer a van to take residents to shopping and the like, minimizing their need for cars. And again, I just want to I want to just note that, the goal here, again, is to lessen the amount of impervious space, but as owners and operators, and quite frankly, investors in properties, you want to make certain they're adequate to attract the certain tenant base you want to reach. Mike, do you have anything in terms of the discussion on the surplus parking in addition to what we're asking for? And that was driven by discussion we had since our last meeting here.
Right. At the last zoning hearing board meeting, we sat here and there was another applicant asking for a parking variance. And there were some neighbors that came and said, well, I don't want them parking on my property, I don't want them parking here. What if you get more guests than you think? And it was sitting in the audience, it was a very interesting discussion. So Rob and I left the meeting and we said, what if we get asked those questions? What if we say, okay, we're asking for 1-to-1, you get it. Well, what if you have more, what if Christmas time? People, what do you do? So we went back and looked at the plan between last meeting and this and said, could we yield more parking? Could we, in this what if scenario? So we did yield, we have now on the plan 38 extra parking spaces. If the 1-to-1 is granted for the age restricted and still 2-to-1 for the non-age restricted, the plan we presented has 38 extra parking spaces. And again, Rob's study believes the 1-to-1's an adequate number and takes into account visitors. As you mentioned, a certain percentage of people don't drive, don't have cars. But again, we didn't want to come to this meeting and not have an answer to a potential question. So we did revisit that, and we have 38 extra parking spaces.
Mike, can you talk about where we didn't increase it, we can't increase the development site to create that additional parking. We can show you how we did that.
So what we did
So
was
is it correct that you have 262 spaces now? Is that-
262 on the plan.
Okay.
Is that what you're asking for, 262 spaces? Because I see 224, I see 245.
Sure, and I can explain.
Okay.
If the variance is granted, 224 would be the required minimum parking. That would be 96 for the non-age restricted and 128 for the age restricted. So 224 would be the required minimum. The last plan we had when we came here last month, on the plan, there actually was 245. But we revised the plan, adding even more parking right here along the north edge. This is the front door. So we added some parallel spaces along the front of the building. Maybe those are used for moving. Maybe they're used for visitors. Maybe they're used for meal delivery. You know, so we picked up 14 more spaces there, and I think we got 3 more somewhere else. So the new provided parking, the 245, that's an old number. The new provided parking is 262. Correct.
It might be semantics that we're talking, we're here asking for a variance and we're showing more parking than what we're asking for. We will commit to the amount of parking you see on that plan. Whether that shapes our, does that change our, it doesn't change our request tonight.
Well,
We need to probably clarify that.
so our request is submitted is 1-to-1 on the age restricted. And then you have 38 extra parking spaces because we just wanted to be able to answer that question. So you could look at this one of two ways. Or we're asking for a variance 1-to-1 with 38 extra parking spaces on the IFCON. And if you say, well, you can't do that. That's not the minimum to afford relief. I mean, what do you, if we got rid of all the extra spaces? Well, then we'd be asking for 1.3 parking spaces per age-restricted unit, but then we'd have 0 surplus spaces, technically. So, to me, it's semantics. I mean, we feel we would like to demonstrate to the board we have extra parking should we need it. So that's why we're asking for 1-to-1, but yet have some extra parking. But if we have to rephrase that request, it could be 1.3-to-1, and then I have 0 extra parking.
I hope that clarifies that.
So when you say age restricted, can you clarify that a little bit?
In typical municipalities, that's 55 plus. The typical tenant we see in these types of projects are mid-70s, late 70s. But it's whatever the municipality lists as an age restricted. In Amherst, New York, it's 55. In Hamburg, New York, it's 62. Listen to what the municipality says, but typically 55. So there can't be a resident under that age.
The parking study that you referenced, does it acknowledge employees?
It might acknowledge employees. It takes into account projects like this across the country. So it takes into account visitors. I would imagine it does take into account employees. It's not a huge employee count that work at the complex. You'd have a manager. You'd have a maintenance staff. It's not a large amount of employees.
A lot of numbers floating around. Let's, one more. So you're okay with the non-age restricted 2-to-1? That's off
right.
That's
That's
off
part
the
of our
table,
package.
right? Okay. So you have 128 2- and 1-bedroom combination that you're saying that you have, that according to the ordinance, you need 256 spaces,
That's correct.
correct? You're saying that you're proposing 1 spot per unit, which is 128 plus 38,
Correct.
whatever that number is. Okay, that's exactly what you're,
And the
Looking
non-age
at.
restricted is at 2-to-1,
yes.
which doesn't,
And what is your makeup? Because I see on the parking study, it talks about 1-bedroom versus 2-bedroom, but can you give me a breakdown of age restricted 2 versus 1-bedroom?
Sure. The 48 let me just go back. The parking study took into account the bedroom counts.
Yes.
And just to clarify that, 128 units in the age restricted, 51 bedrooms, 78 2-bedrooms.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
It's 50, it's right at the first sentence in the project description, 51 bedroom units and 78 2-bedroom units. typically, we find that in the two-bedroom, it's inhabited by one person that used that second bedroom as a den. And then, of course, on the 48, it's a split between one and twos, 50-50.
I'm a little confused by the calculations based on whoever made that up. I mean, we're talking residential, and I see percentages and all that. Is this for, I see at the beginning there, studio efficiency in 1 and 2 bedrooms. But is this for what,
Yeah, so.
the application that you are proposing?
Right, so this study was done after looking at the exact unit count and what we have here. What you see when you see studio and 3+ bedrooms,
Yeah.
you'll see nothing in there, only because that's his template that they use to do the proposal, and it's not populated with any numbers. It might appear confusing. The study was done on this particular senior project with the exact unit count and the exact ratio of 1s to 2s. It's a little, that attachment is really sort of the under the hood look of it. I always go by executive summaries, all right? But yeah, that was just an attachment as to how the calculation was made.
Yeah, and to me, it's, former engineer, the numbers, you know, the base ratios, how are you figuring that and all that? I suppose that's part of their
Part of their methodology,
the
yeah.
methodology, which seems to have would decrease the number of spaces required. But at the end of the day, it has, you know, they're going to be parked there.
Right,
It's not a matter of percentages, maybe during the day, in and out.
right,
But at night, I'm saying, at some point,
right.
those spaces will be filled.
At some point, and then they also look at peak, right? There might be times where the lot is filled up a little bit more than other times. They'll calculate the
Yeah.
travel time, peak, and off-peak.
But that'd be a temporary thing.
That'd be temporary.
Yeah.
I think the long and the short of it is, when you look at, as an operator of these types of projects, on average, as I pointed out in the Amherst project, you might see 50% spaces not even accounted, not even used,
When all's said and done,
when all said and done, which is consistent with that photo I gave. Yeah, this particular project, and in Amherst, for example, you know, there might be 3 or 4 or 5 projects just like this, so there's history there, and that's why they grant that waiver for the 1-to-1 on the senior side. You can see, the material, when it was taken, this was a satellite imagery, but it clearly shows, you know, not a lot.
so you're saying all the units are filled
All these filled in.
and half the parking lot's empty?
Which is the same style.
Try to figure that out. When I understand what you're saying, a second room is a den or whatever it may be. I guess what's troubling is, I think it'd be a unit, but at least part of that are a couple, 2 vehicles. You know, I struggle to see how the census is only at 1. Is there a large majority that you have, or even large minority that you have that have 0 vehicles? Is that part of what takes it down? Because I'm assuming every apartment, if I think of an apartment, I think every person's gonna have a minimum of 1 car. If it's a couple, when I was first married, my wife and I, we were there, we each had 1 car. That was 2 for a 1-bedroom apartment, you know?
And that might apply for the non-age restricted product. That's a good example to use. In the senior product, there are many tenants that don't have cars. And their source of going out is either by the van supplied by the operator, or a family member coming to get them to take them shopping.
And you use the term independent living, is there any care given?
No,
Here,
no,
it's-
this is just a real estate. Now, that doesn't mean that individual tenants can't order food from a food service to eat, you know, but it's not, there's no food cooked for them, there's no medical, independent.
So what happens when, for whatever reason, people in Erie are different than people in Buffalo, let's just say, with their cars, who knows? Maybe the guy comes and has 2 hobby cars or something like that. What happens when everybody gets moved in and then spaces are going, they're full, and I understand you're the operator, so it's not like you're shoving this off on someone else, and all of a sudden the guy pulls in, maybe went to work and the grocery store comes home and every spot's full and there's 10 cars waiting in this driveway with nowhere to park.
It's not gonna happen. That's just that we operate these facilities. And part of the methodology is when you go to a firm like SRF, they'll canvass independent living projects, not only in Western New York or in this neck of the woods or the Northeast. They'll go and canvass. They have a library of history on their side.
Oh, sure, but things happen. And that's why I don't know. I mean, even though we talk that it's a significant hardship due to grades and, you know, wetlands and all that sort of stuff, I'm saying things do happen. You don't know your tenants until they move in. Is there around here we talk about like land banking, some parking spaces, things like that. Is there any opportunities around here? I mean, Mike, you mentioned the grade is 90 feet?
Correct.
I mean, when I look at the overhead that's provided to us here,
Excuse me, Mr. Tanner, as you do that, can we,
excuse me,
oh, sorry.
if you're gonna say anything, I need you to approach. I'll give you a minute.
I was just asking if you can see the map, if we can approach and see the map.
Oh, you can approach to see the map. I just ask that if you view the map, if you have any questions, hold those and then wait. I'll give you a chance to come up and ask them and then they can respond, just so we keep it all on the record.
I will add, I didn't want to interrupt, but the same could be said for the code as it exists for a non-age restricted product, where the requirement is 2 to 1. All right, so there's those projects in here. What happens if everyone does the same thing you're proposing? I mean, I don't know that it's not 3 to 1 for a reason. That's all. That's my point.
Do you have restrictions on your leases, like as to parking, or as capacity for each unit?
Yeah, we limit the parking in our lease. I mean, we can't, now, what we don't do is say, okay, if you're having a birthday party, you can have some guests.
Right.
We don't want to limit that. That's not good for any tenant. But, the project is managed.
Right.
So we want to be mindful of all, and that really lent, we came in originally more than we wanted for one on the senior. But that lent, knowing that question could be asked, that lent to the thinking, can we get any more on this site as a buffer?
You have senior living just up the street from your proposed site.
Yes.
Did you research the parking there as far as the rush ratio, or happen to know, is it on record or anything?
All I know is I've been to that site and I've looked at that site and I've never seen that there is a parking scenario. We'll look at the amount of rents, the charge of rent. If the rent is higher, there could be a possibility of someone owning a car. It's just the social economic. You're having typically what we see, although we never paint a picture across, but if I had to paint a picture of a typical promise, it is a person in their late 70s and their spouse is right. So the home is paid off. But the home has stairs, and the home requires maintenance. And there might be deferred maintenance and someone not repairing the roof because they're in their late 70s. The kids have moved out. Now, you might say, how could they afford this? The house is paid off. But if you look at the cost of home insurance, utilities, upkeep, taxes, you're gonna find that they'll move into this brand-new senior housing complex with security, social activity, surrounded by other seniors, and utilities come with the rent. They're paying less to live here than they were at their home with no mortgage. And so that sort of paints the picture on the tenant. And that's why we don't place second bedroom as really a function of more space, not another person who is there.
And getting back to Bob's point, you know, on the periphery, is that, I guess, Mike, is that predominantly where the wetlands are located, or?
Sure. Well, on this side of the property, there's a very steep ravine. There's a water course that comes right down the middle here. And there are wetlands in here, yes, and a very steep ravine. So we avoided that area. This area is all going to be cut and filled to grade, but these fringe areas here are all, this is a 20-foot cut, so it has a 3-to-1 slope going down, 3-to-1 slope. This is a 20-foot fill. It has a 3-to-1 slope going down the pond. So these areas are all grading, if you will. And this area is all a large ravine with wetlands. There were wetlands within this footprint, but those are part of our permit application with DEP to be permitted away, and they've approved that permit. But we avoided the really difficult terrains over here. And the 90 feet that I mentioned, that comes way down here, because this property continues, way down here to Edinburgh Road, that's 90 feet of
Okay.
elevation.
And you mentioned really long driveway. You have an estimate on length?
I didn't bring a scale. You don't have a scale, right? That's okay. I would say this driveway is probably, I would say, 800 to 900 feet long.
And what is there's a pull-off partway back?
Here,
Yeah, what is that?
this,
Yeah,
that's cross-access. Mr. Berkmeyer owns all this property here to the
Okay.
north. And we received a PennDOT permit for the access to be opposite Rinderley. This is good traffic management. And so we put in a driveway, so whenever Mr. Berkmeyer develops his property, he could come out here and go to the same driveway on Route 99.
Is that the entrance to the bank?
No, the bank entrance is way down here. This is opposite Rinderley. So it's 1,200 feet south of the bank,
So nobody's gonna be driving on that little pullout.
right here. This,
Yeah, right now, unless
Just
he develops.
Tim going to his house, until he develops, and then it would have more traffic, yes. This is Tim's house.
Can you expand a little bit on, you went through the 5 findings here that are looked at. And number 3, hardship not self-created. Is there any way that you could possibly reduce the size of that to meet what we need? Reduce the size of the project.
Well,
Yeah, I think in other words, yeah, instead of it being, you know, this many parking spaces, I guess reducing the number of units, I guess, is that, you know, a financially viable?
Rob can speak to the financial viability of that as a choice. I guess, to answer your question on the hardship, again, when I looked at the ordinance, and I reviewed the zoning ordinance when this 9-month process unfolded and a lot of changes here and there and whatever. It's very hard to read a proposed ordinance and with context. You don't know what's missing until you review it in relation to a proposed project. So when Rob contacted me and said, I want to propose age restricted, I look at the parking, I'm like, well, that's weird. It's not in there. I would have never noticed that in review of the ordinance. You can't think of that. So to me, it's a hole in the ordinance. That's why I'm saying that's a hardship. Something the township probably would have thought about if it would have come up during this 9-month discussion. That's why I'm saying, to me, it's something missing, it's a hardship.
Could you follow up? I mean, is it possible to reduce the size of the entire thing?
I'm trying to gain more units.
Okay.
To reduce the project, I mean, I need income to pay for the total infrastructure, so,
Okay.
no, we cannot.
I would assume the parking spaces are non-revenue generating, and
I'm sorry, Mr. Calhoun, I can't hear you.
I'm just making a statement that the parking spaces are non-revenue generating, and I would kind of,
Yeah, we don't charge tenants, to park in the surface lot area.
And could you add additional parking beyond the additional parking that you've already added?
No. Between last meeting and this,
Maxed it up.
I'll explain that a little further because it's a great question. We actually went back, my office. We actually had to shift this site like 5 feet south, which pushes this in the hillside, just to gain a 9-foot wide space. We had 4 feet left before the pond. I had 4, but I needed 9. So we had to scooch this south just to get enough, so there just is no more room. If there would have been more room, I would be presenting more than 38 spaces extra.
Now, one thing, as you gain the parallel spaces, but also the one garage went away.
That's
Is
correct.
that correct?
And quite frankly, that's a zoning thing.
Okay.
Because accessory buildings in R3 have to comply with side yard setback. They're not treated like a typical accessory building that has like a 2-foot setback. They have to comply with the 30-foot rear yard. So that structure wasn't compliant, so I took it out, put surface parking.
Okay.
But in so doing, I took out a 12-bay garage and got 15 surface spaces. So we got 33.
So it's not a significant increase if the other garages weren't there. It's not like you're adding double the amount of
Oh,
spaces.
goodness, no, a 12-unit garage is gonna get 15 surface, so you're
Yeah.
gonna gain 3 per, yeah, you're talking a handful.
Okay. John?
I think I got all my questions answered.
Yeah. I'm good as well. Scott? Anything? Okay, I think we're okay for now. Now I'll give, Matt, you want to go first? The township?
Good evening, Matt Waldinger, Director of Planning and Development for Mill Creek Township, 3608 West 26th Street. I do have a question before I get started for the applicant. You show the garages on the plan. Are those designated for certain units? Are they free for any resident? I shouldn't say free, but are they available to any resident? First come, first served, no matter what the product is. Okay, that was just a question. I've had discussions on this project with the township supervisors. They don't have a formal opposition to the granting of the variance for this. They do have one concern, though. If the board did see fit to grant the variance, it would be that if the project were to ever cease to be age restricted. The township does not have, as Mr. Sanford said, anything in its code that talks about age restriction, that would require it to remain age restriction. So the supervisors would like to ask that if the zoning hearing board sees fit to grant the variance, that it includes some sort of condition that those units remain age restricted. Also, after hearing the discussion today, and I understand what Mr. Sanford is saying about semantics and whether it's extra spaces or 1.3, I think for the township's perspective, for simplicity's sake, we'd like to ask you, again, if you see fit to grant this, that you look at the number of spaces required minus the number of spaces provided and come up with that amount of variance, subtract the required from how many are provided, rather than saying it's 1-to-1 with extra spaces. That's a little, I think, a little more complex than just keeping track of the fact that they need, I'm just going to throw out a random number, they need 250 spaces, they're providing 230. It's a 20-space variance.
Right now, it's a 90-space deficit.
Sure.
So you would prefer it, supervisors would prefer it to just say, if granted, it would be granted with 90 space deficit. With amount of spaces rather than per unit
Per
and
unit
all
with
that.
extras.
I understand.
Those are our
And just to confirm, the applicant, you would not be opposed to that type of variance, correct?
How that was just stated, no.
Right.
To us, it's 6 of 1 half.
Right.
Okay. Is there anyone else here who would like to speak on this? Please approach and state your name and address.
Good evening, Lon Jenkins, 6011 Meridian Drive area. A few questions. I'm confused. Is this project already approved, or is this a project that needs the variance to go through?
Well, it would require a variance from us, and then from there, it would go to the planning commission for their recommendation, then to the supervisors.
All right, I'm not sure the questions go to you or to Mr. Savarino, but you tell us how close this is to the property line for the houses on Meridian Drive.
Sure.
That's Meridian Drive, and so you're talking 500 feet from Meridian Drive. These are the residential lots.
Okay.
I'd say this distance is 400 or 500 feet.
Okay. Next, I'm not sure if this is a place to speak against the project or to go to the supervisors to speak against it.
No, we'll,
You would speak against the variance request.
All right, so I'll try it that way. You know, you probably know there's this beautiful piece of property that runs from Interchange Road south to Hershey Road. So right in the middle of the most congested area of Erie, by the mall and Wegmans, there's this beautiful stretch of undeveloped property. And it seems as long as I've lived on Meridian Drive, developers have ached to destroy all those woods. I'm thinking of the south side of Mill Creek Marketplace. There is this big hill with hardwood forest there, wiped out, and all that's left is an empty parking lot and a barren field. On the other side of the street, south of Erie Bank, another beautiful piece of wooded property. All the woods were cut down, and all that's left is a barren lot, a bunch of weeds. You know, cities across the country try to sell themselves as being livable spaces, and Erie and Mill Creek are trying to revitalize the area. But if you cut down every green space for more concrete, you're just destroying any sense of a livable space. So I just want to speak against the project overall.
okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Jerry Marucci, 6105 Meridian Drive, and I also own the property at 6115 Meridian Drive. I've been living up there my whole entire life, and my concern is the traffic flow in and out of this complex. We always see what's happening now instead of what's going to happen 5 or 10 years down the road. So therefore, when a project like this comes in at this time, we don't project what's going to happen 5 or 10 years down the road. The traffic flow on Meridian Drive right now is probably 99% Target traffic. I remember, how long has Target been up there? 30 years? I remember going to the township meeting in Summit for that at that time, and then putting the egress and regress onto Hershey Road, which causes this traffic up Meridian Drive. We have no police protection up there for the speed of traffic on Meridian Drive, and I'm just concerned that as they come out of this complex and take a right on 99 to go towards the Mill Creek Mall and come around Interchange Road, they're going to shoot right up Spires Drive and Meridian Drive, and this is going to cause a terrible traffic issue for us neighbors that have been living there all our lives. So that is my concern with the amount of traffic and everything that's, and also, is there going to be lights in the backyard of this complex, which is going to light up the whole neighborhood? What's this going to do to our property values? Okay, you talk about hardships, what about our hardships? So again, I understand progress, I understand that people want to develop their property, but at whose expense are they doing this? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Savarino, could you just speak to the lighting concern that she had?
Sure, we'd submit a photometrics plan. I mean, it has to be approved by our land development plan, and usually light is not, the photometrics plan would not have light cross over the project boundary.
Okay.
I will mention that we are purchasing more land than the development site. And so a large part of the land we're purchasing is remaining natural. And we have wetlands that will be in its natural state as well. And this project is zoned correctly for high-density multifamily, and we're proposing a less invasive use in senior. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Unforeseen circumstances. Jennifer Sustak, 6108 Meridian Drive. You want me to try to lower the microphone? Yeah, sure, sorry. Is that better? Okay.
Can you say your name?
Yes, Jillian Sustak, 6108 Meridian Drive. My concerns are the same as my neighbors, that we live in a very scenic little area off the high traffic path of Peach Street. You can sit in my backyard and you feel like you're out in the woods. You feel like you're in a nice rural area and not in the heart of the city. And I feel like putting something in our backyard with potential high traffic development and lights and lots of pavement kind of takes away from that little chunk of paradise that we have. That's so close to everything. It's just a nice quiet little area to raise a family and to stay for a long time, as my neighbors have stayed there. I live in the house where my grandparents lived and my parents grew up, and I would like to keep it that way and have it that nice scenic area that we live in. So that's all.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, we're going to take a moment to recess and we'll be back shortly. Okay, let the record show, reconvened at 7:47. In regards to appeal number 22-18, do I have a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the proposed 262 parking spaces equaling to a variance of 90 spaces, and that is going to be subject to 128 age-restricted parking units to continue to remain as age-restricted as defined as 55 and over.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Is there a second?
I'm sorry, I will second. I'm a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed?
Opposed.
So moved. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion.
I'll second.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.